Good morning. Several people asked me this morning and in the lead up to this week what I was going to say. Everything from encouragements from Bill to just say something about God or Jesus and then we'll be happy with the rest. To Audrey saying, can you keep it sorted to the text so this makes some sense with what we're doing here? To Stan Clausen asking if I was going to take the opportunity to say everything I ever wanted to say, but couldn't because I was still working here. I'll do something sort of a combination of all of the above, I guess is the best way to say it. The idea of traveling has always appealed to me. That would not be novel to any of you who know me at all, given the number of places that I've been and lived and worked. And over the years, I've come to look at that, and why is that I move around and things. And some moments of clarity realized that there were parts of my life that I was moving to run away from things. You know, you just go to somewhere else and you can start over and get away from the things that you want to get away from. There's also a part of me that loves exploration and the beauty in people and culture and places and wants to experience what other people's lives are like and see this breadth of the creation. And another part that probably just boils down to a bit of wanderlust, like this just love and desire to go and to be on the road and to see things. And one thing you may not know is that, is that one of my favorite books, if not my favorite book, is On the Road, Jack Kerouac. Obviously predates me by several decades, but I recall reading that and it resonated with me, this idea of wanting to go. I'm not alone in this, of course. I mean, you know, I just jotted down, there's 100,000 songs about this and movies and all that kind of thing. Now, these songs will date me. I was like, I got to think of something a little more contemporary. But songs like On the Road Again. I mean, that's sort of the first one I thought of. Too bad Steve is not here because Ramblin' Man, Travelin' Man, lots of songs about men traveling, interesting. Leaving on a jet plane, you know. Songs that we love because they have something in this going. And so it's interesting that the text today, the given text, is this story of disciples on the road. I didn't choose it. And on this, our last Sunday at Willow Avenue before leaving for a new role in Baltimore, we have a traveling story. And so here in Luke, and we just heard from Linda this story in Luke 24. The setting of this story is the context of a journey. And it's typical of Luke. If you've read Luke and Acts, you'll know kind of all of Jesus' mission is set as a journey, him going from Galilee to Jerusalem. I mean, the whole book is his movement from one place to another and ultimately to the right hand of God. This is how Luke pictures Jesus' journey. But he also casts this story of the early church, the early community as a journey that begins in Jerusalem and then goes on to Judea and Samaria and to the ends of the earth. So for Luke, this author anyway, they saw this as foundational to who they were. So much so that the early community of followers of Jesus was often called people of the journey or people on the way. People on the way. That's what they were called. People who went. And so I would say that the life of faith, the life of following Jesus, is one of movement. It doesn't always have to be geographically, but it's one of movement, both individually and corporately. And so allow me to share some reflections on what has been this stop on the journey for us. This unique season with Willow Avenue, with all of you, this shared moment together, and the ways we have found Jesus, I have found Jesus along the way. So Audrey mentioned this text, one of several stories that follow the resurrection. It's actually the same day, right? This is that day in the story. The day the empty tomb was discovered, and we have these disciples who are now traveling from Jerusalem, where they had all been, to a nearby town. which is about 7 miles away, it says in the text, so a couple hours walk, apparently. I guess if you run, you can make it faster. But they're walking, and it says they were talking about everything that happened. A lot had happened in the past few days. If you think about their story, Jesus had entered Jerusalem, and, they had the giant crowds and the parades, and then the arrests, this Last Supper, crucified, empty tomb. Like that is a lot to cram into a week. I don't want to draw too many comparisons, but it feels like our weeks have been like this in the last few weeks, Margie and I, getting things ready for the house, doing the house, packing the house, etc. So you've all been in those kinds of moments of time where everything is happening all at once. Probably a little bit whiplashed, I guess. And so Jesus appears to these two. It's really kind of a comedic scene as we read it. This person that they had been spending all their time with and they don't recognize. Jesus had already appeared to the women. It says that later on in the story we read that Jesus had appeared to Peter. So he's beginning to make these kind of appearances, but they didn't recognize him. And so Jesus in the story asks, "What are you talking about?" Knowing full well that he's actually what they were talking about. It's like when my stories have to do with like kind of embarrassing children, so it's really bad. But when your kids are looking for something and you're like, "Are you looking for your shoes?" You're holding the shoes in your hand and like they maybe don't even see that you have them. It's like that's what it feels like. Jesus is like, "Hey, what are you talking about?" And it's Jesus. But I think it's a really powerful picture and a good metaphor for us. It seems comedic because it's impossible to our minds, but we often miss seeing Jesus. We often miss seeing God at work because we're just in our stuff. We're in our heads. We're busy with life. We're dealing with suffering or grief or struggle, the day-to-day, and we miss. Some days I go to bed and did I think about God today? Did I talk with, that's weird, it's part of my job anyway, but there are days like that when I get to the end and I'm like, how did I get through this day without seeing Jesus? And so I can relate to these disciples. Other days it feels like everything is a prayer and you're kind of always seeing things. And so I wonder what makes us miss seeing Jesus. What makes me miss seeing Jesus? Or a more positive question is, what helps us to see Jesus? Now, each of us, I think, have our own kind of ways that we relate to God, the ways that we connect with God. For me, in my own spirituality, when I can read, and I don't read enough, but when I can read, it's like my mind opens up to God. That sounds very woo-woo, but it's kind of how it feels. I'm like, it's like my brain's clicking because I'm understanding something new about the universe and people and God. That's me. That's how it works for me. I also find that I connect well in quiet. So some people really, it's in the busyness that they see God. For me, it's in a stillness that I often can settle and hear. And it's also in conversations. I find so often that it's a conversation with a friend that helps me see God in a new way, as God kind of somehow connects this moment of conversation. So that's me. For you, it might be something different. I'm sure it is. And I love that about this congregation, that this is a church where people can ask questions and work out their spirituality. This is something that people have said repeatedly in every newcomer's lunch we have, visitors' class, everything. People say, that's one of the things that I appreciate is I can just be myself and sort of help figure it out with other people and ask my questions. So I thank you for letting us be ourselves, for letting Margie and I be ourselves. I'm particularly thankful for allowing us to, we came, transition, family, global pandemic. A lot was going on for all of us. And I really felt like there was a good amount of kind of leaning in, but also letting us do what we needed to do. And we really appreciate that. And I especially appreciate that Margie has been able to be her own person in this congregation, which isn't always the case when you have kind of pastoral people, So to allow her to have her space and let her do the things that she does and be her own person. So thank you for that. Because we all need to find Jesus ourselves. We all have our own roads to walk with God, where we discover what our unique spirituality is like. So I encourage you to do what works for you. Try something new, but figure it out. And then we get to kind of help one another. So I love that we have so many things where we kind of help, encourage, and nurture other people in their personal spiritual development. Talk together like these disciples did on the road about what you're feeling, what's happening in your life. Those are super important. I would say, if I could say, I wish this could be more and more true of every congregation, and this one in particular. Find ways to talk about what's going on in your life and what you're wondering and what you're enjoying and what you're struggling. Like that's the best part of what church can be. And so don't let people kind of figure it out and ask their own questions mean that we don't lean in a little bit. So I think that's the what can happen that's not as good, right? Is we're like, well, they're asking their things, they're working it out, and we never come alongside. Not to force, not to tell, but to say, how are you doing? I grew up here and then lived in other cultures, and I know that one of the things that I struggle with on a regular basis anyway, is knowing when to lean in and when to back off. I don't know if that's true universally, but it's true for me, and I feel like I don't know the cultural cues sometimes to know. I kind of grew up in a family where we don't lean in very much. I want to be the kind of person, because I think God wants us to be the kind of people that kind of lean in and help one another on our own walks. So that's my hope, my encouragement. That as we make Jesus the center of our faith, it changes the way we experience life and the life with one another. And if Jesus isn't the center of our faith, well, then we're really just a social club or a service club, and that's fine too, but that's not really what church is. So we need each other to help in this journey. And we see that in this text, I think. One of the things you can see here is that these disciples come to this village now, right? Emmaus, so they come to this village to which they were traveling, and they ask Jesus, they didn't know it was Jesus, but they asked the person to come with them rather than carry on, because it's getting late in the day, don't travel at night. Come join us. And then in sharing this evening meal, their eyes were opened and they recognized him. Commentators rightly point out that this is certainly written for the early Christian community to understand the value of the communion meal, of the Eucharist. It's here that we together see Jesus, who we no longer see physically, but we see in that moment. And that's true. But also, the power isn't in the ritual. The ritual is a tool. It's a tool to connect us with a greater reality. And the reality is that Jesus is present whenever we gather in Jesus' name. That's the truth. That's the powerful reality. Because the communion meal is not something that we each do individually, right? A personal moment with God surrounded by a whole bunch of people. It's a shared moment. It's a shared meal in whichever form that it takes. So whether it's juice or wine or Pepsi or bread or pita or tortilla, those are symbols. Those are symbols. They're tools, because the power is in our shared memory, sitting together with Jesus at the table, remembering who he is, remembering what he has done. That's what it's meant to do. The emotional power of memory is strong. I was having a conversation with someone this week about how strong the emotional power of memory is. Not just the ideas, but this feeling. And so I'll remember any number of parts of our shared story. I jotted down some. It's not an exclusive list. But I recall Rob welcoming us on our first Sunday here. So I went to high school, and I went to college with Jason, her son, one of her sons, and so we kind of know one another. But the first Sunday we were here, hiding in the back as best we could, Dee just welcomed us gently and quietly, without a fuss. I remember Connie having us over in her backyard. This was like in heavy pandemic days, when nobody could be near anyone. So we just sat in the backyard, kind of across from each other in lawn chairs. And a home group welcoming us on a Zoom, had us over and did a Zoom tea with us and brought over all the things for tea and coffee. Bill telling me everything and how it works around here. That continues to this day. And during the pandemic, the really heavy time of it, Audrey and I would have our staff meetings by just going for walks through our neighborhood. We live close enough to each other anyway, and we would just walk, and then we could be, 3 feet apart and just walk and talk, and we just did our meetings that way. I remember having to figure out sound and Zoom and video, and then sound and then Zoom and then video, and kind of every iteration of church, having to redo these things and refigure it out. Helping in the kitchen and learning where everything is from Karen and Peggy. I'm still learning where those things are. Putting hands together on work days and getting really dirty and dusty, particularly in the attic. I remember the Sunday, this is one of my favorite memories, actually. We were just talking about it the other day, where when we had come back to meeting in person, and then I think the Delta variant, when some really bad thing happened with COVID, so we had to go back to everyone meeting at home temporarily. But we who were leading the service were here. We were the only ones in the room leading the service, like we were like television people or something, with the camera, and we were just up here, and everyone else is at home. But the funny part was, because Melly was like kind of dancing and doing, because she was off camera and just kind of goofing around and being silly, and like probably that's one of my favorite, strongest Sunday memories, because it was like everybody just had to kind of do it that day the way we did it. And so also just the whole process of taking really a long stand on being a welcoming and affirming congregation, and kind of it coming to a head, so to speak, in recent years, building on years and years of work and conversations, and then all the consequences of that, including Lynn's credentials being taken away, but doing that all together. Like people ask me about this, about how did the church do this process, and I think they wonder, like, how hard was it, and what was all the fallout, and I continually tell them, we did it together, and so it was okay. It doesn't mean we all agree on every part of it, but we did it together nonetheless, and that is how it should be. I recall Marin's baptism in Marlis's pool. The Lenten experiment from a year ago, actually, when Audrey was at Gazebo and I was at South of Shaw with pints with the pastor. Pretty much a miserable fail at the time, for me anyway. Hers went really well. But it has become a weekly gathering of people getting together, better than when it was supposed to be taking place. And from that, a deep friendship with Stan Clausen in particular. And so many friendships. That's the hard part of leaving, isn't it? It's the people. There's other people there that will be good too, but they're not our people yet. So you are the ones that we will miss the most. Supporting us, praying with us, crying with us through our adoption journey and everything else. Innumerable lunches, coffees, conversations, and a few beers in there as well. To me, those are our truest communion, our meeting with Jesus together. Moments when my eyes were open to the presence of God, and I will cherish those memories. I'm grateful that we'll follow this service today with a meal for a lot of reasons, but this symbol of fellowship and hospitality, nourishing us physically, socially, and spiritually. So thank you for welcoming us, letting us find a place among you, And I pray that you continue to be a welcoming community for everyone, because I know that that takes work. Not everyone fits easily or automatically or even feels welcome. So I encourage you to stretch yourselves for the sake of others, so they can also join in this communion and experience God together. The Jesus welcomes all, and so do we part, making community the center of our lives. And finally, I want us to learn from these disciples, because you see their response, and I really like the way you read it, Linda, so thank you. They immediately got up and returned to Jerusalem. So now they had to go back 7 miles, in the dark, I guess, probably at this point, to tell others what they had experienced. This encounter with Jesus was so good, so powerful, that it had to be shared. They didn't tell people what to believe. They didn't tell anyone what they needed to do. They just shared what had happened to them, which kind of, I think, is the way we do it. So I will tell others what is happening here in this community, just as I tell people about my own walk with God. That's the nature of God, of reaching out, of loving, of healing, of working through us. And like the disciples, we find Jesus on the road, because for many, it's not personal prayer times where they experience God the most. Some of us it is. A lot of people it's not. It's not the songs we sing or the rituals we perform here on a Sunday. It's out there. It's out there. Helping prisoners, caring for the poor and the oppressed and the marginalized, calling out injustice, standing up for what is right, loving our neighbors and our enemies. That's where we find Jesus. That's where a lot of people see Jesus. It's a theologian, David Bosch, who I love, and I'll give you this book if you talk nicely to me. He's got a really big, fat, giant book. I will not give you that one, and you don't want it anyway. But he has a tiny little book. There was actually a series of lectures that he gave back at AMBS called A Spirituality of the Road. And that's what this is. So he talks about this idea that it's not about charging up our spiritual batteries like on a Sunday. We come and we charge up our spiritual batteries because the whole rest of the week's going to wear it down. So we got to get it filled up, and then we're going to just run it all the way down until we fill it up again and then run it all the way down. I think that's how people think about church outside of the church. But instead, it's charged as we go. It's charged as we go because Jesus is out there. So it's the joy of working with children at our Creation Speaks Kids Camp. It's helping out on a benefit concert for someone in need. It's sharing food with the community, for our community through the neighborhood market with EPU. It's fighting for indigenous people's rights and land. We don't do all of these filling up on Jesus time and then giving us enough strength to go out and do all that work. But we look for Jesus out there, joining in and drawing energy from God at work there. So we're all on an Emmaus road, so to speak. I love, where's Peggy? Are you here, Peggy? Somewhere? Yeah, hi, Peggy. The walk to Emmaus is, I've done the walk to Emmaus. I know Peggy's done the walk to Emmaus, and maybe others of you. This whole idea that, like, that's the living out. It's the rest of our lives is this road that the disciples were on. That's the road that we're on. So it means that we don't have to minister from a place of guilt or obligation. You know, like, oh, we should be doing all of these things. Or chasing after every idea that comes in our heads, because we have a lot of good ideas. But instead, it's seeing what is it that God is calling us to be and to do. What opportunities are there for us that fit with who we are? What would we love to do to be part of God's work? Where is Jesus speaking to us in ways that make our hearts burn, just like these disciples? So the instruction to go and make disciples doesn't seem so bad if that's what it means. Loving our neighbors as ourselves, working for justice and peace on personal and systemic levels, because reconciliation is the center of our work. So, I say this life of faith, this life of following Jesus, is one of movement, both individually and corporately, paying attention for God as we go, looking for Jesus as we go, because Jesus is on the road, out there. So where am I looking? Where are you looking? Where are you finding Jesus to make Jesus the center of your faith? And how can we share this and encourage each other? How are we creating opportunities for communion with Jesus together, building community as the center of our lives? And what if our love for one another and others, and wanting all of creation to experience the goodness and fullness of God, motivated us to make reconciliation the center of all that we do? This is my final challenge, and then I'll finish, to all of you, because soon enough, the moment will pass, the opportunity will move, the season will end, it will be time to move on. And so for us, Margie and I, our time has come to move on. And like Jesus in this story, we will disappear from your sight and leave you to work all this out. But not to worry, because, like Jesus in this story, we won't be gone. We'll just be in a different place. And we will see you on the road.